In 1962, a script from America called King Kong Meets Frankenstein landed in the halls of Toho, and the studio knew history was about to be made. They quickly rewrote it to replace Frankenstein's monster with Godzilla, hoping to revive their hit franchise that had lain dormant for almost a decade, in Ishiro Honda's 1962 film King Kong vs. Godzilla.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, Jim.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham and I am here along with Chris, and today we are doing the huge seminal battle, the big monster bash, the monster brawl, if you will, in King Kong vs. Godzilla. And I seen this film at a very young age. It was very high on my list back in the day. I loved watching it. Of course, I would always fast forward to the fight scenes. I had very little care for characters when I was a kid, as most kids do. They just want to see the monsters fight. But this was a good one. This film's fun, and it's still fun to this day. I believe this was one of the first films that my Uncle Bob showed me when I was first getting into Godzilla, because I loved the 1976 King Kong. I absolutely loved it. I would rent it from the video store like once a month for, a weekend at a time or whatever it was, 5 days at a time. And I would constantly watch that. So then I'd seen King Kong vs. Godzilla and absolutely loved it. Still love this film and have fun with it to this day. Chris, how do you remember King Kong vs. Godzilla? What are some fond memories?
I imagine that it was either my dad or my older brother that showed me this one. It was one that we owned on VHS in a blue VHS box that I recall, and I don't remember the first time ever watching it. It's one of those that I feel like I was probably watching, when I was so young that you're not even like fully self-aware. I just feel like I've always have memories of this movie in my head. I don't remember the experience of watching it for the first time, but watched it a lot growing up, wore out the VHS tape like you. I would also just like skip the fight scenes and the monster battles and monster scenes, and I was always more of a Godzilla fan than a King Kong fan, and I kind of didn't like that Godzilla always seemed to win pretty definitively in most of the other movies and all of the other movies, but then here he doesn't really beat King Kong, and I never liked that. But I love the movie. I've always loved the movie since, farther back than I can remember, apparently.
Yeah, this is a good one. And I mean, when you got probably the two biggest monster or kaiju staples in like monster film history, I guess you could say. I mean, it has to be something big. And I agree with you that I did not like as a kid that they made, I guess you could say, Kong the winner or, the victor in this. And I know you and I had talked before about there was that long lost fib that Godzilla ended up winning or was shown as the victor in the Japanese version. And I had not seen the Japanese version of this until the Criterion collection. So I was in my early 20s, I believe, and I had no idea. I was going into it watching, assuming that somehow Godzilla was going to come out the victor, and
Wow.
He did not. So I was shocked on that one, and still a little disappointed.
Jeez, I always remember. See, I never heard about the different endings, but but I remember hearing about the myth at a young age, and sort of the early age of the internet, of there's a myth that the Japanese ending was different, but it's not true, And from what I understand, it's just at the end of the Japanese version, you hear both monsters roar, almost like they're giving a final bow at the end of the movie. And I think at the end of the American version, you only hear King Kong's roars, like almost like King Kong's victorious roars. So like that's the only level of difference between the Japanese and American ending.
Yeah, I know there's actual, like, other than the ending, there's quite a few differences in the film, and well, I'm sure we'll get into talking about the differences in like the score and whatnot. The Japanese score like completely trumps the what changed in the American film and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun thing I always like to joke about with the ending is, Godzilla is in about a dozen more films in this series after this movie, and King Kong is never seen in another Godzilla movie. So as a kid, I always would joke that King Kong goes and dies in the ocean, or dies of the radiation poisoning, and Godzilla just swam away. But that was just me being a fun kid.
Absolutely, we all had our theories, at a young age.
Godzilla drowned him on the way back to the island.
Yeah, somehow later on he caught up with him, and kind of like a shark, he just came from underneath.
Just
Surprise!
Pulled him down. Yep. We saw enough evidence in Godzilla versus Kong to convince me that Godzilla would easily drown Kong in the open water.
Oh yeah, that's definitely his domain, and somewhere where Kong is not comfortable.
Exactly.
Well, let me get into a little bit of history on the film. King Kong vs. Godzilla is a 1962 kaiju film directed once again by Ishiro Honda and written by Shinichi Sekizawa, with special effects by Eiji Tsuburaya. Produced by Toho, this is the third installment in the Godzilla franchise, as well as the Showa era. It stars Tadao Takashima, Kenji Sahara, Yu Fujika, Ichiro Arashima, Jun Tazaki, Akihiko Harada, Mi Hama, and Akiko Wakabayashi, with Shoichi Hirose as King Kong and Hiro Nakajima as Godzilla. This film was released to Japanese theaters by Toho on August 11th, 1962, as part of Toho's 30th anniversary celebration. And the idea for the film originated when independent producer John Beck approached Toho with a screenplay by George Worthing Yates titled King Kong vs. Prometheus. And that was based on a story treatment by the original King Kong stop-motion animator Willis O'Brien. And Toho ended up acquiring the rights to use Kong from RKO Pictures and Universal, even though O'Brien received no credit or compensation for his idea in this film. Beck produced an altered English language version of the film for markets outside of Asia, which was released to American theaters by Universal International on June 26, 1963. And the first film to feature either of its titular contenders in color was this film in 62. King Kong vs. Godzilla pits the most famous two monsters from the West against his counterpart from the East. And then, as we spoke of before, a heavily re-edited Americanized version of the film was released theatrically in the United States on June 26, 1963. The film's success revived the previously dormant Godzilla series, resulting in a new film being produced almost yearly for the remainder of the 60s, and then halfway through the 70s, beginning with Mothra vs. Godzilla in 1964, which we will be looking at on our next episode. And then the renewed popularity of King Kong resulted in the creation of the animated series The King Kong Show, and then that served as a basis for another Toho film featuring the character in 1967, which would be King Kong Escapes, which hopefully one day Chris and I will dive into that as well, because that is a cheesy schlock fest that is also a good time.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I wanted to dip into on the backstory that you laid out there, which was really informative, is Willis O'Brien, the the gentleman involved with the original King Kong. It's kind of a sad story of his involvement with this, because it was kind of his genesis of a concept that was at one point a King Kong versus Frankenstein kind of a movie and things like that, and then he kind of got screwed out of all of the sort of profits and proceeds and monies and deal makings that came from it when it became, when Toho when Beck went to Toho and it became a King Kong versus Godzilla movie. Willis O'Brien kind of got cut out of the loop, and it was, from what I understand, he was pressed for cash at the time. So it's kind of this sort of unfortunate kind of unraveling of events for him. But we did get a classic film out of it, but I guess it's bittersweet.
Yeah, I mean, that would suck to not get any compensation for something you were such a big part of. But I mean, years later down the road, what can you do?
Yeah, exactly. And there was something slipping my mind now. Oh yeah, not only is it the first time either of them were in color, but it is also the third film for characters as well. They each had two black and white Kong and Son of Kong, and then Godzilla Raids Again, before making their color debut in a shared third film.
Yeah, and I always liked, the first two films for each series was so close. King Kong in 1933 was so huge.
Yeah.
That Son of Kong came out that very same year.
Which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I mean, they were very few months apart. I don't know the exact. I believe it was like 4 to 6 months, somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
it wasn't very long.
Yeah, I think it was something. It was like March and November or something like that. Like March was King Kong, and Son of Kong was maybe something like November or something like that. And I suppose when you look at the number of months between, it was March and December. Okay, but when you look at the months between Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again, if Godzilla had come out in early 1954, like a March or May, they probably would have had Godzilla Raids Again out by the end of the year. So, there you go.
Yeah, and you get those films, and then, King Kong laid dormant for almost 30 years, and Godzilla, for not as much, but 7 years. And then you bring them together, and then Godzilla just gets on a roll, just back to back to back to back to back to back films.
Yeah, Toho.
And then it brings
Toho
a little more interest in Kong too.
Of course, Toho saw dollar signs for sure.
Oh yeah, and then I mean, you get the 1967 King Kong Escapes, and then you get the 1976 remake of Kong, and then I believe it was 1986 King Kong Lives. So there's always been interest in these two kaiju or titans or monsters, whatever you want to call these two, that they always come back. So that's why, as Godzilla fans, if there's a little hiatus or something in between films, we're never too worried, because no matter what, he's always going to come back. So there's going to be interest somewhere down the road.
Yeah, and an interesting little bit of trivia is that the original Godzilla series sort of concluded in 1975, and then the Kong remake came out in 1976, the next year, and then years later, the Millennium era for the Godzilla franchise concluded in 2004, and then the next year in 2005 we had the Peter Jackson King Kong. So history sort of repeating itself there.
I honestly have never thought about that or put it together. I absolutely love that. That is a fun little nod that I would have never put together, and I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, pure coincidence, but it's kind of funny, Godzilla goes away and then Kong shows up the next year.
Hey, as long as you keep bringing them back, I have no problem with it.
Exactly.
I am always ready for more Kong and more Godzilla.
Definitely. Can never have too much.
Exactly. Perfectly said. Why don't we'll get into a trailer for King Kong vs. Godzilla. We'll get a plot synopsis in here, and then we'll come back with the usual, some fun facts, numbers, and get into some more on the film.
Yeah, let's do it.
負けちゃいかん。新聞には全紙広告だ。キングコングが我が社の製品を買い込んでニコリと笑ってる写真だ。
いや、キングコング笑いますか？
ああ、笑ってもらうさ。
国連ではこのままゴジラを放置しておくことは世界の破滅になる。
そうか。千葉東海岸にキングコング上陸です。
嫌よ疎開なんて。
これだけ言ってもわかんねえのかな。お前のためなんだぜ。
台風ならコースを避けられるけど、ゴジラキングコングはどこに来るかわかんないのよ。
このままじゃ筆ごとパーだ。
だ、キングコングの所有権はスポンサーにある。許可なしに勝手なまねはいいさ。
いえ、タコ。
Mr. Taco, head of Pacific Pharmaceuticals, is frustrated with the television shows his company is sponsoring and wants something to boost his ratings. When a doctor tells Taco about a giant monster he discovered on the small Faroe Island, Taco believes that it would be a brilliant idea to use the monster to gain publicity. Taco sends two men, Osamu Sakurai and Kinzabaru Furu, to find and bring back the monster. Meanwhile, the American nuclear submarine Seahawk gets caught in an iceberg. The iceberg collapses, unleashing Godzilla, who had been trapped within it since 1955. Godzilla destroys the submarine and makes his way towards Japan, attacking a military base as he journeys southward. On Faroe Island, a gigantic octopus crawls ashore and attacks the native village in search of ferrolectin juice, taken from a species of red berry native to the island. The mysterious Pharaoh monster, revealed to be King Kong, arrives and defeats the octopus. Kong drinks several vases full of the juice while the islanders perform a ceremony which causes him to fall asleep. Sakurai and Furu place Kong on a large raft and begin to transport him back to Japan. Mr. Taco arrives on the ship transporting Kong, but a JSDF ship stops them and orders them that Kong must be kept out of Japan. Meanwhile, Godzilla arrives in Japan and terrorizes the countryside. Kong wakes up and breaks free from the raft. Reaching the mainland, Kong confronts Godzilla and proceeds to throw giant rocks at Godzilla. Godzilla is not fazed by King Kong's rock attack and uses his atomic heat ray to burn him. Kong retreats after realizing that he is not yet ready to take on Godzilla. The JSDF digs a large pit laden with explosives and poison gas and lures Godzilla into it, but Godzilla is unharmed. They next string up a barrier of power lines around the city filled with 1,000,000 volts of electricity, which proves ineffective against Godzilla. Kong approaches Tokyo and tears through the power lines, feeding off the electricity, which seems to make him stronger. Kong then enters Tokyo and captures Fumiko, Sakurai's sister, taking her to the National Diet Building, which he then scales. The JSDF launches capsules full of vaporized ferrolectin juice, which puts Kong to sleep, and rescues Fumiko. The JSDF decide to transport Kong via balloons to Godzilla in hopes they will kill each other. The next morning, Kong is deployed by helicopter next to Godzilla at the summit of Mount Fuji, and the two engage in battle. Godzilla initially has the advantage, dazing Kong with a devastating dropkick and repeated tail blows to his head. Godzilla attempts to burn Kong to death by using his atomic breath to set fire to the foliage around Kong's body. A bolt of lightning from thunderclouds strikes Kong, reviving him and charging him up, and the battle resumes. Godzilla and King Kong fight their way down to the mountain and into Atami, where the two monsters destroy Atami Castle while trading blows, before falling off a cliff together into Sagami Bay. After a brief underwater battle, only Kong resurfaces from the water, victorious, and he swims away back towards his home island. There is no sign of Godzilla, but the JSDF speculates that it is possible he survived. All right, let me hit you with some quick numbers here. King Kong vs. Godzilla was released theatrically in Japan on August 11th, 1962, and grossed 352 million yen at the time on a budget of just 5 million yen. So this film was massive.
Yeah, and I think I believe it still holds the record for the highest ticket-selling Godzilla film in Japanese history.
Whoa, pump the brakes here. My very next number. It sold 11.2 million tickets during its initial theatrical run.
Yeah, there you go.
And you are absolutely correct. It still holds the most ticket sales to this day. I'm not including Shin or anything at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think including everything, it's still number one. And they kind of maybe more appropriately track ticket sales and number of admissions as opposed to the money made like we do in America a lot. They talk about your 200 million openings and things like that. It's like, well, that leads to the records always being broken because of ticket price inflation. So perpetually the records will eventually be broken because the ticket prices keep going higher. By measuring attendance like they do, when something comes along like Shin Godzilla, that is the most attended Godzilla film since the 1960s, that's a very, very big deal, because that really casts a light on how truly successful it is and how truly big it is within the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. But I mean, I absolutely do love that they count individual ticket sales, because 11.2 million tickets, I mean, that's a big film. I mean, 352 million yen on 5 million yen. I absolutely understand why these films kept going.
Yeah. And I mean, from what I understand, by the time they got around to the 90s, it wasn't even so much, from what I understand, that, those films were hits at the box office in the 90s, but it was one of those things where the commercial side of them was just dominated by the merchandise and the toys and the tie-ins and the apparel and the comics and all of these things that when they were dropping those annual 90s movies, every time they dropped them around Christmas. So then there'd be a huge boom in all of the merch sales and all of this stuff, in time for the end of the year. And so those movies were just making such a bigger splash beyond the box office.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're a kid and you want monster toys, I seen Jaws when I was younger, so I started wanting all different types of shark stuff. And, I saw Godzilla and I wanted all the Godzilla stuff, or Jurassic Park, I wanted all the dinosaur stuff. So, it definitely has an influence on the viewers that are watching it.
Yeah, it says something that those 90s movies, that the Heisei films weren't released over in North America until the VHS days of the late 90s. But I remember those toys, those Heisei era toys, the Trendmaster toys and things, were still on the shelves at Toys R Us. So it's like, that really casts a light on just how big and popular they were, that these films weren't coming over here, but the toys were coming over here.
Well, hey, I wish we could get, some Trendmasters back, because I destroyed a lot of mine and I wish I could have them back.
Yeah, every now and again I do some window shopping on eBay just to kind of look at what people have and to have the nostalgia trip for all the ones that I used to have.
Yep, and then I look at the price and I exit out of eBay.
Yeah, exactly. Drop the single tier and click out.
Yep. I'll get back to some more numbers on this one for you. On Rotten Tomatoes, this film has an approval rating of 52% with an average rating of only 5.1 out of 10. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 40 out of 100, indicating mixed or average reviews. A 5.7 on IMDb out of 10. Google users, again, helped us out on this one. 85% of Google users liked this film.
Yep, those Google users know what they're talking about.
Absolutely. In Chris's words, the Chad Google users. He loves it.
Exactly.
At an average 1962 Japanese ticket price, 11.2 million ticket sales were equivalent to an estimated gross of approximately 1.29 billion yen, or at the time, 3.58 million American dollars. Including re-releases, the film accumulated a lifetime figure of 12.5 million tickets sold in Japan, which adds up to a total estimated Japanese gross of approximately 2 billion yen, or around 6 million American dollars.
Which is big. You know, the fact that you have to sell 11 million tickets to make $6 million back then says a lot about what ticket prices were like.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I went to see Godzilla -1, our IMAX tickets were like $13 or $14 a ticket. Yeah. And then when I went to see it a second time, I didn't go to an IMAX. I just went to a local theater like 4 minutes from my house. I think our tickets were like 10, which is, compared to prices back then, still way outrageous compared to the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
In the United States, the film grossed $2.7 million, accumulating a profit via rentals of $1.25 million. And overall, the film is estimated to have earned just under 9 million American dollars worldwide.
Nice.
Yeah, not bad for 1962.
Yeah, no, not at all.
My last couple for you here are Godzilla's screen time for the film, which is 9 minutes and 15 seconds, or about 10% of the film, with his first appearance coming at 26 minutes and 14 seconds, or 27% into the film. So
it's a little deep. That's a little deep, compared to Raids Again, in terms of how deep into the film you get before Godzilla's revealed.
Yeah, it is. But what I like and what helps is the original is about 96 minutes. Raids Again is 80, 81. And then this one is low 90s, 92.
Yeah, sort of cracking the code a little bit.
So, I mean, we're keeping around the 8.5 to 9 minute mark for screen time for Godzilla. So, I mean, that I'm okay with that. If he shows up a little late and I still get 9 minutes, hey, that just means the last 60 minutes of the film I get more Godzilla.
Exactly.
So that is all I have on numbers for you for King Kong versus Godzilla.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, there was a lot on that one. I'll go straight into some fun facts for you, or behind the scenes facts, so we can get into the fun stuff that we like, which is our favorite characters and musical score and whatnot.
Go for it.
For many years, I spoke on this earlier, a popular myth has persisted that in the Japanese version of the film, Godzilla emerges as the winner, which I spoke of earlier, that I sadly found out he did not. Not only was this the first Godzilla or King Kong film shot in anamorphic scope ratio, which is the 2.35, but it was also both monsters' first appearance in color and stereophonic sound. So
that newfangled stereophonic sound, what the kids are listening to these days.
Before the movie's Japanese premiere, Toho released side-by-side interviews with King Kong and Godzilla as if they were sumo wrestlers preparing for a bout.
That just sounds like it would be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of I used to want to be a film producer, director, so I used to watch all the special features and behind the scenes. It reminds me of the Freddy vs. Jason showdown they did.
I was about to say the same thing. They had like a boxing style weigh-in and press conference and things like that.
Yeah, I believe they did it right in. I believe it was in Vegas or something like that. But yeah, they had them. They go face to face and take pictures, and they had Freddy Krueger like asking questions,
and Jason wouldn't say anything whenever they asked him questions. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, if it was anything such as that, where it was like a weigh-in or something, that would be fun.
That would be a lot of fun. That would be good.
In this film, there were 4 live octopuses used in the scene where the giant octopus fights the natives. They were forced to move by blowing hot air on them. And after the filming of that scene was finished, 3 of the 4 were released, and the 4th became special effect director Eiji Tsuburaya's dinner.
Peter would have had a field day with this movie. You're blowing hot air on the animals, and then you're gonna eat one of them. Like, oh man, this movie would have been so canceled.
I find that just comedic because I feel like even in the 60s over here in the United States, something like that is never going to happen. And I find it just, I get a kick out of that. You know, you're using them for your film, and then it's like, all right, guys, I'm going to grab this one. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to go have dinner.
Yep, Japan doing it in the Japanese way, and nobody's going to stop them.
Hey, whatever works, keep it rolling.
Mm-hmm.
This film this is my last one for you. This film marks the debut of Godzilla's famous theme by Akira Ifukube, although it was completely removed from the American version.
Interesting. Yeah, it's unfortunate that kind of the only music that stays in the American cut is basically the sort of King Kong kind of dance, trance, sleeping music, and that's really unfortunate that so much of the score is removed and replaced with, I think, a lot of it is music from The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. And I mean, I believe what you're talking about, it's almost like the main title sequence.
Yeah, they kind of keep the title, and then later on it's kind of the King Kong kind of trance music, and then you don't get to properly get the Godzilla theme until Mothra versus Godzilla.
Yeah, and that one, we'll get into that when we get into that, but God, do I love that one.
Yeah.
And that's all I have for you for some behind the scene facts or some fun facts for you.
Perfect.
So do we want to transition right into, you want to go into your favorite character for us? Let us know what you thought.
Yeah, sure. So I actually went with the comedic Mr. Taco for this movie. He's just got this really like fun, hyper energy, and he's this sort of not really much of a showman, but he's not really sleazy, but he's just very much, he's just all about publicity and the commercial side of the company, and he's just a lot of fun. It's like just this very animated kind of character, and I like the energy he brings to the movie.
I was absolutely in agreement with you on that. I chose Mr. Taco as well, and even in both versions, I liked him, but in the American dub, which is the version I'll say I watch more of this film.
Yeah,
he's just a goofy character.
Yeah, over here in America, we don't really have proper access to a really good presentation of the Japanese version. It's sort of a very low quality bonus extra on the Criterion Blu-ray. So the US version of King Kong versus Godzilla is probably the one I'm sort of forced to watch the most often, just for the quality reasons.
Yeah, I thought Tubi had the Japanese version for a very little bit, and I went to look on there and I couldn't find it, so I might be remembering wrong.
Yeah,
but
because this one in particular is in a weird kind of limbo where the deal that Toho and Universal basically struck was that in America, Universal or outside of Japan, shall we say, Universal has the American cut. They don't have access to the Japanese cut outside of Japan. And in Japan, Toho only has the Japanese cut. They don't have any rights to the American version. It's something along those lines. So when Criterion did the set, they got most of the films just directly from Toho, but for King Kong versus Godzilla, they had to go and make a license deal with Universal and then turn around and make a separate sort of agreement with Toho and Universal, perhaps, to get the Japanese cut as well, because it's like a weird licensing thing where you're licensing a version of the movie that Universal doesn't own, but there's no way to release that in North America unless the US version is also included. So it's just kind of this weird thing. So it's a really unique situation.
Yeah, so I must have been mistaken on that. It probably was the American version on Tubi, and I know it used to be on YouTube as well, and it used to be all over for free, and then it just stopped. And I think it was right around when the Criterion Collection came out is when a lot of that like started to slowly disappear. Godzilla films off of this and that. I know there's a lot on like HBO Max. There's some on Peacock.
Yeah, and for a long time, Criterion, all of the stuff that Criterion had, not King Kong versus Godzilla because it's Universal, but for a long time, all of the ones that Criterion had from the Showa era were on YouTube with ads.
Yeah, and that was one of the ways. I would have the discs and stuff at home, and I would want to watch one. So I would just, instead of popping in and getting the disc, I would just go on YouTube or Tubi and throw it on that way.
Oh, I had slow days at work where I would just slide in the American, where I would just click over to the American version of the 54 film just to kind of pass time with Raymond Burr's narration of the movie.
Hey, you are not the only one in that boat, sir. I would also do that some days. But I did choose Mr. Taco. I just because he's a goofy guy. I like him saying that he wants his own monster. He wants to make money. And there's a couple comedic lines that he gives in the film, and he's all around just a fun guy. I like being able to have kind of like one of our main characters who we can make fun of and have a laugh with and whatnot.
Yeah, and the sort of straight-laced, sort of serious main central characters of this movie just aren't terribly dynamic. They just don't really like land and draw you in the same way that the energy of Mr. Taco does.
No, not at all. He's full of energy, full of excitement. And I mean, he, as a character, kind of makes the film center on him when he's on camera.
Yeah. Stealing the show.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a perfect way to put it. I'll move on to our favorite, since we agreed on that. Let's see what we got for our favorite musical score. I'll give you mine, and it was Godzilla's Resurrection.
Okay.
It's absolutely one of the best in the film for sure. Akira Ifukube, he's bringing his A game again, and I'll play a little as I always do for our favorite soundtracks. This one is Godzilla's Resurrection. That becomes an absolute staple of the Godzilla franchise, and it's reworked and redone later on in the series, and it's done by different composers here and there, but in this film, I absolutely love that soundtrack, and it's one of those that gets me pumped and ready for the battle that's coming.
Yeah, it's an iconic sort of forever piece of the franchise, just can't be removed. And for my favorite score, I essentially went with another version of that theme from the soundtrack. I think it's just a few tracks later, and it's just the longer version called Terror of Godzilla. So that's my main one I went with, but I wanted to give a shout out to The Sleeping Devil, which is the drum music that the natives all play when Kong is sort of being put to sleep, and it's just always sort of just stuck in my head as a kid. So I just had to shout out that track, and I love that scene of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great one. And since you shouted it out, I'll play a little bit of the Sleeping Devil here, you know, just so anyone that doesn't know what we're talking about, they can get a little taste of it, because that's also a good track, you know, and it's different. It's not something that you expect to hear in a Godzilla film, I guess you could say. So I'll play a little bit of that for us. Yeah, that one. I mean, it's catchy. I like that one, and I like the scene that it accompanies. So, I mean, I don't really have a problem with any of the soundtrack or the musical score in this film. I tend to listen to a lot of these Godzilla soundtracks at work. I'll just type them into Spotify or whatever, and I'll just throw them on while I'm doing my tasks at work, just to pass the day by if I'm not listening to a podcast or just, you know, a normal, some hip hop, some rock, whatever. I'll throw these Godzilla or other film soundtracks on all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. They're catchy. I mean, this movie brings back Ishiro Honda and Akira Ifukube, and they just both absolutely kill it with this movie.
As they tend to do as a tandem.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. How about we get into our favorite quote or most memorable line of the film? Would you like to go first on this one, or for your favorite scene? What do you want to do here?
I'll go first on this one.
Okay.
So it's a little dialogue exchange where Taco says, "Papers, radio, TV, magazines, all Godzilla, 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 free publicity for our rival." And then his assistant says, "There's a movie too." And I like that, because that is a line that's not in the American version of the movie, but it's one of the only cases where I found a Godzilla movie sort of being meta, of a reference to there being a Godzilla movie within the universe of the Godzilla movies, which is just like a really fascinating concept to me. So I just always like that line, and it's just a fun kind of humorous line, and it says a lot about Taco's character. So I dig it.
Yeah, there's a couple good lines in here that I could point out before I say my, you know, in the American version, he's like, "King Kong can't make a monkey out of us," you know, and that always got a little crack up from me. And there's another.
I always love the scientific expert they bring on for the newsreel segments in the American cut, you know, where he's examining the brain size of Godzilla and Kong, and you know, he gives this great King Kong is a thinking animal, you know, like just funny, stuffy lines like that are just a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and you know, there's another one where they're talking about who would win in a fight, you know, King Kong or Godzilla. I can't remember the exact quote in the film. But the one I ended up choosing was, I believe his name was Dr. Shigezawa. And it was a little more of a meaningful quote. I do like when monster films like this hit on a quote or something that's real life, like it kind of hits with nature and stuff like that. And he said, "Well, I guess that we as humans must change how we treat plants and animals. It's time to learn from them." And I just like little quotes like that where, you know, people are pretty much saying we need to learn from nature. We need to take care of our planet, because you don't get a lot of those lines in these monster films. So it's just nice when they try to throw something in there that kind of makes you take the film a little more serious.
Yeah, it's like the end of the old classic South Park episodes where they always sort of parody the idea of having a moral of the story at the end of it, you know? That was always a lot of fun. I've got to shout out what was probably my favorite joke of a line in the American version, which is where Godzilla's coming, and then they ask, they're like, "Where are you going?" And they're like, "Hokkaido." And then it cuts to the news guy, and he goes, "Do not go to Hokkaido. I repeat, do not go to Hokkaido." And it's like, I just always loved that bit as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you can hit on jokes like that, where you can switch scenes and make someone saying in the previous scene and instantly switch to something else someone's saying and make a joke out of it, or give the audience a nice like laugh out of it, kind of like a calming laugh, or just, it makes the film go by. It adds a little something to it when you can give us a laugh in a monster movie, especially something with that sort. I especially do like that scene, and I'm glad you brought it up.
100%.
So I guess that leaves me to go first on our favorite scene of the film, and it has to be, Godzilla and Kong's fight scene. I don't know if I have a favorite fight scene in the film. I do like the first time the monsters meet up, and Kong's kind of like throwing rocks at him, and Godzilla, breathes his atomic breath, and Kong kind of like scratches his head like, I got nothing. What the hell is that?
Yeah, the monster fights in this movie, they're my favorites as well, and they're absolute gold. There's the moment where Godzilla, the first time he uses his breath and roasts like a helicopter or a chopper, and you see this like Kong staring and just like blinking in amazement, like, what the hell did I just see? Like, it's just like, oh, I'm way in over my head. It's just a great moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, you get the classic Kong slamming the tree into Godzilla's mouth, and Godzilla lighting it on fire and blowing it back. There's so much good monster action in this that, Kong grabbing Godzilla's tail, and Godzilla like just throwing him or launching him with the strength of his tail, and kind of like Kong's on the ground and Godzilla's just bashing him in the head with his tail, like trying to deliver a knockout blow, and just stuff like that. As a kid, that makes you laugh and kind of cheer for the monster. If you're a fan of Kong, you're probably upset at that point, but I was a Godzilla fan, so I was sitting here cheering, saying, hit him harder, hit him again.
Exactly. 100%. Team Godzilla all the way.
Oh yeah, Kong's a close second. As long as he's not fighting Godzilla, I'll root for him.
Exactly.
All right. Since we're on scene, is there any other scenes you wanted to talk about in this film? I know there's a lot of good ones, so I figured I'd ask you.
Godzilla emerging from the iceberg is a really cool scene because it's that sort of direct continuity between the second film, Godzilla Raids Again, and this one. And I always like when they sort of pick up with Godzilla right where they left him. I enjoy that in these movies. So Godzilla breaking out of the iceberg was always just a cool, it's just one of those visuals that's like stuck in my brain at that kind of like such a young age, you can't even really remember it, but Godzilla sort of breaking through and out of the ice, it's in my brain forever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get the people in the pilot, they're like, Godzilla. Yeah, it almost sounds like a video game screen from them.
Yeah, very. They're hamming it up a little bit, and I love it. It kind of makes it even better almost.
Yeah, the scream that they do saying Godzilla, it makes me think of the intro scene for what is it? The Godzilla Save the Earth, the guy in the boat with the binoculars. It reminds me of that. Yeah,
they're definitely given like the radio broadcast version of the scene a little bit. Godzilla.
Yeah, they're going full cheese with this one.
Exactly.
One scene I wanted to give a quick shout out, which probably besides the fight scenes was my favorite scene. Other than I do agree with you that the iceberg scene was great, but it was Godzilla when he's still in the water and the military comes out and tries to kind of stop him and keep him at bay, and they attack him there. It shows him kind of heading towards land and he's not quite there. I love that scene. I tend to like a lot of scenes when it's just Godzilla against the military and there's nothing else. There's no like human cut in or anything, you know, our main characters. It's just a couple minutes quick of Godzilla fighting the military and just giving them the work and then continuing on his path.
Yeah, in that scene, one of my favorite effects moments in that sequence is when Godzilla touches the electrical wire, and it has this really good effect, the way the pyrotechnics and whatnot set off, and I always dug that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you know, it seems to be a Godzilla weakness in this film and a Kong strength. And you know, as most people know, this was supposed to be a Frankenstein film. So
yeah, you can imagine a electricity being used to sort of power up Frankenstein, and so just somewhere in the translations and the evolution of the project, it became a King Kong power.
You know what? I didn't like it when I was younger, but I learned to get over it as I got older. I was like, you know what? They did it. It's done. So I'm just going to accept it and let it be.
Yeah, I kind of dig it. It'd be kind of interesting if they somehow, if MonsterVerse Kong somehow gets some kind of something going on there, some energy based stuff. That'd be interesting. You know, we'll see.
Well, yeah, because back then, I mean, Kong didn't have an axe, and clearly he wasn't just going to beat Godzilla with his strength. So they had to even out the fight somehow. They had to make it a little more fair.
Yeah, he's rocking some kind of gauntlet in Godzilla and Kong. So perhaps that will be used to do some interesting things. Who knows?
We'll see come that movie, but I know you don't like to watch trailers, but I've watched the trailer a couple times, and I don't know if I'm excited or not.
I watch the trailers. I just make sure that I avoid all of the online spoilers like the plague.
Okay, yeah. I don't know if I'm excited for this one or not, but I'm still going to go see it.
I'm through the roof excited. To me, it looks like an anime come to life. I'm into it.
Oh, boy. Here we go. All right, well, we'll continue on this one and get into some monster design. What did you think of the King Kong design in this film?
It's not the best looking King Kong design. I mean, it's ugly as sin. I mean, you know, it's a rough looking design. They do this interesting thing where they have these arm extensions to give it these long arms in certain shots to kind of pound on the chest, but they sort of cut between the short arms and the long arms, and it kind of has this weird, it's a kind of awkward effect. And I mean, it's the King Kong, it's kind of, the suit and the look and the design is kind of iconic in a not so great way, I guess. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, it's just, it looks very cheap, you know. Again, this is 50 years ago, or 60 years ago. So, I mean, they did what they could. It looks very cheap. I kind of dig how, like, gritty the face looks. Like, you know, it's like almost a little too smushed.
Yeah,
and
there's some shots where it looks like really, really angry. Like it's got this like really, really angry and determined kind of feel about it. But, you know, generally speaking, it's not the best sort of sculpt or mask or what have you.
Yeah, and then when I did notice when he's in the water, when they are carrying him on the raft with the dynamite, once it explodes, if you pay close attention, you can actually see like the human portrayal behind the mask once it's all wet, because it becomes kind of saggy and whatnot.
Oh gosh, the water isn't very kind to a fur-based suit at all.
No, it's for the film that it's in, I absolutely love it because this film is cheesy. It's a schlock fest. It's fun. So I mean, the King Kong in this film is fine for me. What do you think of the updated Godzilla design?
I kind of dig it. I kind of like the more sort of overt lizard look. You know, they get rid of the ears and just and they shape the mouth in a way and it just kind of feels a little bit more overtly reptilian as opposed to overall monster. I think they were kind of leaning into big monkey versus big lizard kind of a thing. And Godzilla isn't green in this movie. He's not actually green in any of these original movies, but this is one where you watch it and like on film, like in the footage, it kind of reads as green a little bit, like it kind of feels like a pale green almost. So that's kind of I bet that's kind of where the Godzilla is green trope kind of comes from.
Yeah, and I like the Godzilla design in this. It looks a little more reptile to me. You know, it looks a little more gator, crocodile.
Absolutely.
And I do like, the only thing I don't like, I mean, again, this is 60 years ago, so I can't complain because I grew up with these films. You know, when Godzilla bends over, you can see the folds in the suit and whatnot, but you could, the same thing with the original Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again so far. But I mean, this is a much improved design from Godzilla Raids Again, I would say. I still like the Godzilla Raids Again design for what it is.
It's an underrated.
But I'd say this one is... Yeah, it is. But I would say this one's a big improvement, and I like the design of it for sure.
Yeah, and even though this one, in the way that it is kind of only in this one movie, it still feels sort of like vintage Godzilla in some ways. Like it still feels kind of like an iconic Godzilla look, even though it was just in kind of one movie before they started to evolve it a lot more. So yeah, I dig this look.
Yeah, and most fans have this close to the top of their tier ranking or their suit rankings or Godzilla design rankings, and I'd have to agree with them that, you know, for 1962, this is great.
Yeah, it's a great design, you know, and I just love, like, I love my most enjoyed thing about Godzilla changing designs between every movie is that you just get to think of him that is like, he's always evolving, you know. That's kind of like the fun sort of headcanon of like, oh, if he's frozen for a while, he's going to come out looking different. And if he's in the water for a while, he's going to just look different after a few years. And if he's landlocked on an island for a few years, he's going to look different, and his body's going to sort of adapt and mold and change to whatever environment he's sort of chilling out in for the last couple of years. So I just always kind of dug that about the character.
Yeah, maybe the new Godzilla X Kong is taking a little page out of the original King Kong vs. Godzilla's book. Godzilla's sitting in the ice for a while, and he kind of morphs himself a little bit. You know,
yeah, it is a little bit of a wink and a nod to that Godzilla emerging from the ice. You know, that is definitely a tether back to this one, and you know, taking a page out of Mothra's book. You know, cocooning himself to evolve to his new form like a Pokemon.
Hey, well, we got to catch them all, because I'm hoping this new one is great. I'm hoping for it, like we just talked about. But I see that he's pink or glowing pink with radiation and his atomic breath. So all I want is the story to explain that, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I believe so. You know, I think it's, you know, they could say what they want, but I think it's supposed to be a bit more magenta than overtly pink. You know, there's some visual guides that show that like on the spectrum, like the highest or the most strong like form of like gamma radiation or something is like, it's like pink or magenta-ish on the color spectrum. So like, I think there's a little bit of a line of thinking behind it, you know, but we'll see when we get the movie. You know, maybe they just wanted to like a lot of interesting neon colors to bounce off of and to make something very vivid, you know, so they gave him this sort of like neon pinkish magenta vibe to make it cool and vivid and colorful.
Yeah, and I'm hoping I dig it. You know, I'm a Godzilla fan for a reason. It seems like it's still going to be more of a Kong film, but Godzilla and Kong are in it. I'm going to go see it.
Yeah, it definitely looks like it's more of a King Kong movie, but I get the distinct feeling that it will be a sort of Godzilla stealing the show kind of a movie. Even if Godzilla's not in most of the movie, I get the feeling that it's going to be like Godzilla's going to kind of own the movie a little bit. So I'm into that.
Absolutely. I hope you're right. But we got some monster design. The octopus, those were real. So can't really say them look fake, too fake in this film.
Yeah, they almost look too real. It's a little disturbing thinking about the cast and crew screwing with the octopuses to get them to move and react and things like that.
Yeah, I used to get a chuckle once I realized what it was, but the backdrop that the octopus is in front of, it's just a screen that Kong was throwing like the rocks at. And I never understood that when I was young, clearly. But as you get older, you can see that they're just like bouncing off the wall.
Yeah, it's like a rear projected image onto the wall of the octopus, and then they're bouncing the rocks off of it. Like there's some moments where it's surprisingly effective, but yeah, it's not the greatest effect shot. Me and my older brother were always infatuated with the weird noise that the octopus makes as Kong is fighting it, when it's like suctioning and stuff. Like I don't know, like it always just kind of like that noise always just kind of like enthralled us.
Yeah, I don't know if they did that to kind of like make it a little disturbing or what they did that, but it's definitely a unique sound.
Yeah, just to kind of give it some more energy and liveliness.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, why don't we go into, this is our third Godzilla film. Why don't we get into our tier ranking for the 3 films that we have so far? And again, for anyone who hasn't listened to the first 2 episodes, get on that, by the way. But we are doing the Godzilla franchise by eras. So we are doing the first 15 films in the Showa era. We are doing a keep 10 and get rid of 5. So once we get to enough films, we will delete 5 of these out of complete existence and keep 10 of them.
We're playing a game of top 10 that's a bit more playing for keeps with some higher stakes. Of if you had all the original film prints to all of these 15 movies, but you could only afford to save 10 of them, which would be the 10 you would save, which would be the 5 you'd get rid of.
All right, well, Chris, you go ahead and lead us off with your top 3 ranking or top 3 countdown of these 3 films.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy at this point in the game. Number 3 spot and the lowest, I would put Godzilla Raids Again. Number 2 spot, I have King Kong versus Godzilla. And number 1 spot, I'd have Godzilla 54.
All right, I'm going to absolutely agree with you. My ranking for these 3 is exactly the same.
We'll be, I know we diverge down the road here, so we'll teach you a lesson when we have to.
Oh boy, here goes this guy. No. We've talked about some films that we don't exactly agree on, so once we get to those episodes, it'll be fun for the listeners.
And I'll say what I said then. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. You can think that Invasion of Astro Monster is a bad movie, or you can be wrong.
Man, this guy, I don't know what I'm gonna do with him. I need him, but geez.
I'm teasing. I've Astro Monster has only grown on me in recent months,
and I love it. I love it.
Yep.
Well, how about let's get into some final thoughts on King Kong versus Godzilla. What do you think?
Sure. I think it's good. I think it's kind of iconic for the franchise. It's sort of the first official versus movie, the first kind of crossover between Godzilla and another monster that was sort of known on its own outside of just being in Godzilla movies, and still holds the title of the biggest ticket selling Godzilla film in Japanese history. That's a huge title to hold, and so it's an iconic film, and it sort of lays down the structure and the tropes and the style. Everything from like sort of the 2 battles where you kind of have the battle part 1 that goes a certain way, and then you have the final battle where it goes a little bit differently. Everything about the structure and style of these movies just gets laid out right here on the table in this film. So it's a important piece of kaiju film history.
Absolutely. If Godzilla Raids Again was kind of the groundwork for Godzilla battling other monsters, then this film in my mind just kind of set the tone. This brought it up to 10, and I mean, with probably the 2 most recognizable names in monster film history and two of the most recognizable names in film history. So, I mean, they brought this up to 10, and this is an absolute recommend for me. I mean, if you haven't seen it, go watch it.
Yeah,
If you have seen
what are you
it,
doing with your life?
yeah, no kidding. I mean, this film's massive. But I mean, if you have seen it, watch it again, just so you can reappreciate the cheesiness and the fun that this film is. Because when it comes to Godzilla battling another monster, this film has some of the best fight scenes, in my opinion, of the franchise. It's just pure fun.
Yeah, just terribly well executed. You know, it's pure entertainment, pure escapism.
Absolutely. Put it on for 90 minutes and let all your stress and worries just go out the door.
100%.
We will continue the Godzilla franchise on our next episode next week with one of my favorite films, which is Mothra vs. Godzilla, which was released on April 29th, 1964. And before then, Chris, I want to say thank you for joining me again. This is always fun. I always appreciate you joining me on one of these and letting us nerd out again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to come on here and do this. Looking forward to many, many more in the future.
Absolutely. I want to tell people to check out our Facebook page. We do have some polls on there from the Godzilla franchise, and we will have polls on there from every film and episode that we do. That's Chills and Thrills Podcast on Facebook. But again, thanks, Chris, for joining me. Mothra vs. Godzilla is next week, and until next time.